A billionaire's son was dying, but the woman who could save him was never even allowed to try. The machines were steady, but his breath was not. 7-year-old Lucas Whitmore lay still in the ICU bed, his cheeks sunken, his skin pale yellow from the liver failing inside him. The boy who once ran down marble hallways was now too weak to lift a finger. Around him, silence held like glass, delicate, one heartbeat away from shattering. At the foot of the bed stood Naomi Ellis. Her blue scrubs looked faded under the harsh hospital light, but her eyes, exhausted, red-rimmed, never left the boy's face. She had just completed her 3rd night shift in a row, but when the call came in that Lucas had seized again, she ran. Faster than the on-call physician. Faster than his father. She was always the first to arrive. Just outside the glass door, 2 security guards tried to hold back a flurry of movement. Doctors, legal teams, someone from the press. But none of them could walk in. Not without permission. Not without the one thing they didn't have. A signature from Harlan Whitmore, Lucas's father. Billionaire. CEO of one of the most powerful biotech companies in the country. And the man who refused to let Naomi do the one thing that could save his son. 4 hours earlier, Naomi had sat across from the hospital's transplant board. Her voice steady, hands folded in her lap. She had already shown them the tests. Blood type match, enzyme compatibility, all green. A perfect match. Miraculous, even. But the answer was no. "Ms. Ellis," the hospital administrator said, adjusting his tie. "You're not family. You're staff. You're a nurse." Naomi didn't flinch. "I've been with this boy for 18 months, through every chemo cycle, every collapsed vein, every seizure. I held his hand when his father wouldn't pick up the phone." A pause. No one looked up. "I may not have his DNA," she said softly, "but I'm the one he calls when he cries." Still, the answer didn't change. Now, Naomi stood there, hands trembling slightly as she wiped the sweat from Lucas's brow with a cool cloth. His fever had spiked again. They were running out of time. Behind her, the door clicked open. Harlan Whitmore entered in a tailored black coat, the smell of aftershave and authority trailing behind him. His expression was unreadable, stone carved from grief, ego, and something else too stubborn to name. He didn't look at Naomi, just at his son, and the monitors. "What happened?" he asked quietly. Naomi kept her eyes on the child. "His vitals are unstable. He's declining fast." Harlan exhaled through his nose, a man used to controlling boardrooms, not biology. "Is the transplant team ready?" Naomi turned. "You mean, have they changed their mind about me?" He didn't answer. She stepped forward. "I'm the only match. You've read the results. You've seen the scans. I'm ready. I've been ready." His jaw tightened. "I've risked my heart for this boy every single day," Naomi said, her voice low but clear. "And now I'm willing to risk my body. But they won't let me. Not unless you approve it." Silence. Then a sound broke it. A soft cough from the bed. Lucas stirred, his eyes fluttering open just slightly. Weak, but aware. He looked up at Naomi, then to his father. And in that moment, between life and fading light, he whispered, "Mommy has helped me." Naomi froze. So did Harlan. Lucas had never called her that before. Not even close. He barely spoke these days. But now, with the little strength he had left, he chose that word. Just one. And it shattered the room. She was just a nurse, until the boy started calling her something else. 2 weeks earlier, the pediatric oncology wing was quiet. But Naomi's shift was never still. Her steps moved like instinct, checking vitals, adjusting blankets, keeping records in her mind even before the chart. But when it came to room 214, the steps slowed. Not out of hesitation, but reverence. Inside that room, Lucas Whitmore's world was shrinking, and Naomi was trying, desperately, silently, to hold it open a little longer. Lucas had been fighting for over a year. Liver failure, immunotherapy, transfusion reactions, a collapsed bile duct. Every treatment only bought time. The boy had grown thinner, quieter, wiser in ways that should never belong to a 7-year-old. But when Naomi walked in, he still smiled. Sometimes. Harlan Whitmore rarely came during the day. Business, boards, acquisitions. But when he did, it was with gifts, imported toys, tech he couldn't yet use, clothes 2 sizes too big. Naomi never said anything. But once, when Harlan brought a signed football jersey, Lucas just stared at it and whispered, "Do you think it'll hug me back?" She had no answer. Naomi's care wasn't in grand gestures. It was in consistency. She was the one who knew Lucas's favorite spoon, the exact temperature his broth had to be to keep him from vomiting, the lullabies that didn't remind him of hospital beeps. She memorized every lab result. Not because it was her job, but because no one else remembered what it was like to be forgotten. Some nights she stayed past her shift. Not because she was told, because Lucas didn't want to sleep alone. One night, as thunder rolled through the city and rain lashed against the windows, Lucas clutched her hand tighter and asked, "Naomi, do kids without moms still get to live long?" She turned toward him, her heart hollowed out in real time. "Yes," she said, brushing his damp curls back. "But it helps to have someone who loves you like one." Lucas's whisper, "Mommy, help me," was still ringing in Naomi's ears. Harlan stood frozen. He opened his mouth, closed it again. His fingers moved as if to reach for his son, but stopped mid-air. Naomi knelt down, level with Lucas's fragile gaze. "I'm here," she whispered, choking on the word. Lucas blinked, barely able to nod. And just like that, without fanfare, without legal documents or blood tests, something shifted. In Lucas's world, Naomi wasn't just the nurse anymore. She was Mommy. Not a title, a truth. Outside the room, a transplant nurse whispered to the attending physician, "She's not even family, but look at them." The attending replied, "We measure matches by blood. Maybe we've been measuring wrong." Hours later, Naomi sat on the edge of the break room sink, alone. She held the lab report again. Blood type, perfect. Enzymes, aligned. Compatibility, 99.6%. In bold red at the bottom, non-familial donor, not eligible without special authorization. She looked at her reflection. Pale, tired, and determined. "If love doesn't count as family," she whispered, "then maybe the system's what needs surgery." Have you ever loved someone enough to be called family, even if no one else saw it that way? She had the match that could save his life, but the system only wanted papers, not love. 3 days after Lucas called her Mommy, Naomi stood before the hospital's transplant ethics board, not as a nurse, as a last resort. The conference room was sterile. Frosted glass walls, cold steel chairs, a long mahogany table that didn't match the hope Naomi carried in her hands. A neatly folded document. Her test results. She placed it down, slid it across to the 3 men and 2 women who stared at her, not like a mother, not even like a person, but like a liability. Dr. Coleman, head of pediatric surgery, cleared his throat. "Ms. Ellis, thank you for your concern, but we're clear on this matter." "I don't think you are," Naomi replied. "I'm a 99.6% match. That's closer than most siblings. You've tested everyone in his bloodline. No one else qualifies." One of the lawyers adjusted his glasses. "You're not related. I've been with him for 18 months. You are not on any legal document. I am in every moment that boy's fought to stay alive. Coleman shifted in his seat. Naomi, we appreciate what you've done as a nurse. Stop calling me just that. The room stiffened. Naomi stood taller. That boy calls me Mommy. That wasn't coached. That wasn't a mistake. He chose that. He asked me. And I said yes. Because I would die for him. I would give anything. You want to talk about risk? What about the risk of doing nothing while he slips away? No one answered. She stepped closer. Her voice didn't rise, but it no longer asked permission. You say I'm not family. But tell me this. What do you call someone who wipes vomit from his mouth, sings to him while he shakes from seizures, sleeps on cold vinyl floors because he's afraid to be alone? Still silence, Naomi's hands trembled as she pulled a folded envelope from her pocket. These are my consent forms, physicals, psychiatric clearance. I've checked every box, every one, except one, your approval. Dr. Coleman folded his arms. We've had lawsuits from non-familial donors, custody complications, media fallout. A woman from the legal team added, The Whitmore family is high profile. We can't afford… Naomi cut in. You can't afford another dead child on your record either. Silence dropped like a gavel. Coleman sighed. We'll take this under review. You'll be informed within 48 hours. She stared at him. Lucas doesn't have 48 hours. Then she left. Flashback. 6 months earlier, Naomi stood in the hospital hallway watching through the glass as Lucas cried. A nurse tried to insert another line, but his veins were too tired. His arms bruised, his body limp with resistance. Harlan stood at the far end of the hallway, phone glued to his ear. Naomi walked in, sat on the edge of the bed, took Lucas's hand. Breathe with me. In and out. Like waves, remember? Lucas stopped crying. The line went in. And Naomi, who wasn't family, who had no legal rights, was the only one he let close. Flashback ends. Back in her apartment that night, Naomi couldn't sleep. She stared at Lucas's drawing on her fridge. A stick figure family. Him, her, and a woman with wings. That's mommy number 1, he had said. The one in heaven. But you're the one who stayed. Her phone buzzed. A message from a resident nurse she trusted. The board rejected the donor proposal. Unanimous vote. Too risky. I'm sorry. Naomi sat down, her hands in her lap. Then slowly she unfolded the letter she had written days ago. To Lucas, if I'm ever not here, and you wonder why, I need you to know. I tried. Every door they closed, I pushed again. Every rule they built, I bled on. Because you're not just someone I care for. You're someone I chose. That's what makes me a mom. She closed the letter, sealed it, and stared into the dark. If the system wouldn't fight for him, then she would. What would you risk if the system called you nothing, but a child called you mom? She had no legal rights, no approval, but pain doesn't ask for permission, and neither does love. Naomi returned to the hospital the next morning without a shift assignment. She wasn't on the roster. No one expected her. That made it easier. No questions, just glances. She slipped into Lucas's room just after the rounds. A nurse was adjusting his IV drip, another checking his vitals. Naomi stood by the doorway for a moment, then silently took a seat by the window. Lucas was asleep. He looked smaller, like his skin had forgotten what sunlight felt like. One of the nurses nodded at her before stepping out. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Everyone knew. Everyone had seen the vote. Everyone had read the same line in the system log. Donor match rejected, non-familial classification. Naomi reached for Lucas's hand, careful not to disturb the tubes. It felt cold. She leaned forward, placed her other hand over his. I'm still here, baby, she whispered. I know they said no, but I'm not done. In the hallway, a staff member from the legal department passed by. He gave Naomi a look, the kind of look people give someone at a funeral. Respectful, pitying, distant. She hated that look. Hours passed. Naomi stayed in the room. She watched Lucas twitch in his sleep. His lips moved now and then, whispering things no one could understand. At one point, his eyes fluttered open. Just briefly. "Mommy?" The word was barely a breath. Naomi leaned in quickly. "I'm here." He looked at her, but his eyes were foggy, like he wasn't sure if he was dreaming. Then they closed again. That night, Naomi walked into the hospital chapel. She hadn't been inside in over a year. It was empty. Just wooden pews, dim candlelight, and a plaque on the wall that read, "Faith isn't about proof, it's about presence." She sat in the back row, took a breath, and for the first time in weeks, let herself cry. Not the quiet tears she had learned to hide behind masks and clipboard checklists, but real, unfiltered grief. Grief for Lucas. Grief for the little brother she couldn't save. Grief for the love she had given without title, and the rejection that followed anyway. When her tears finally slowed, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the folded envelope. Lucas's letter. She had rewritten it 3 times. The last version was simpler. Fewer words. Deeper truth. "If I don't wake up, know that Mommy said yes." She placed it gently inside her bag, zipped it shut. And then she did something she hadn't done before. She walked to the staff computer in the nurse's station, logged in under her ID, and printed 2 things. The lab result, the patient compatibility waiver request. She slid them into a new envelope. This one didn't have Lucas's name on it. It had Harlan's. The next morning, she waited outside his private office in the East Wing. A glass wall, a sleek black desk. A schedule stacked with investor calls and board reviews. Naomi sat there for 2 hours. When his assistant came to escort her away, Harlan looked up. And for a moment, their eyes met. He didn't speak, but he motioned for her to come in. Inside, Naomi said nothing at first. She placed the envelope on his desk. "I know you're scared," she said softly. "So am I." He didn't touch the papers, she continued. "You don't have to like me. You don't have to call me family. But Lucas did." A pause. "And if you say no again, then you'll be the one explaining to your son why the person who could save him wasn't allowed to try." Still, he didn't speak, but Naomi saw it. The tremor in his fingers. The breath he didn't quite take. She left the envelope and walked out. That evening, as she prepared to go home, Naomi found something tucked under the door of her locker. A post-it note. No signature. Just 6 words. He read it. He's thinking hard. She folded the note, placed it next to Lucas's letter in her bag. 2 notes. One from a child. One from a system that still hadn't decided if she mattered. But both of them still breathing. And Naomi? She wasn't waiting for permission anymore. She was getting ready. This wasn't the first child Naomi had watched fade away. But this time, she had a chance to change the ending. Naomi hadn't slept in 36 hours. She sat in the corner of the break room, her feet tucked beneath her, sipping coffee that tasted like cardboard. The hospital lights never dimmed. Not really. They hummed with the same false brightness no matter the hour, reminding her that in this place, time didn't pass. It just pulsed between hope and grief. She stared at the message again. He read it. He's thinking hard. She didn't know if that meant yes or another polite no. Her body was tired, but her mind was burning with memory. The last time Naomi sat beside a dying child, she was 15. It was her little brother, Marcus. They'd been inseparable. Naomi, the quiet protector. Marcus, the whirlwind of joy and impossible questions. He was diagnosed late. Liver cancer. Aggressive. Too aggressive for the clinic in their neighborhood. Too expensive for a referral out. Their mother worked 2 jobs. Insurance denied everything. There was a treatment out there, just not for families like theirs. Naomi remembered one night clearly. Marcus lay curled under a threadbare blanket on their living room couch, too weak to get up. His skin had turned a shade she couldn't name, somewhere between gray and yellow. He was trying to write a letter to Santa. Naomi sat beside him, pretending not to cry. "I'm not asking for toys," he said. "Just maybe if he knows a doctor." She had no answer. She just held his hand until he fell asleep. 3 weeks later, he was gone. Naomi stood in the hallway of the ER, holding her mother's purse, while the world spun silently around her. No one ever explained why the system said no, why money got to decide who lived and who died. She decided that night that if she ever had the power to make sure someone else's little brother didn't vanish without a fight, she'd use it. 17 years later, she met Lucas Whitmore. Same yellow skin, same fragile smile. But this time she was no longer powerless. Lucas had never called anyone Mommy before. Not even a nickname, not even a question. His biological mother had died, giving birth to him. He had grown up with photos and bedtime stories told by a busy father and a series of nannies who never stayed long. But Naomi did. She was there when the fever first broke. She was there when his hair started falling out in the shower. She was there when he stopped asking for birthday parties. She knew how he liked his socks folded. She knew which Pixar movies made him cry and which ones made him forget the hospital for an hour. She once spent 5 hours sewing a stuffed rabbit's missing eye because he whispered, "He can't sleep if he's not whole." And somewhere along the way, Lucas stopped calling her Nurse Naomi. He started calling her nothing, just reaching out for her hand, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Until one night, his fever had spiked again. He was hallucinating, crying, calling for someone. Naomi had pressed a cool cloth to his head, whispering softly, "I'm right here, baby." And then, eyes still fluttering, lips cracked with heat, he whispered, "I want to call you Mommy. Just Mommy. Is that okay?" She hadn't answered. She couldn't. But the next morning, she found something written on the back of his hospital wristband. Mommy Naomi. In shaky, uneven letters, he had given her a name. Not a job, not a title. A name. Now, sitting alone in the break room, Naomi pulled out that wristband from her bag. She had kept it, folded carefully, like a sacred thing. "I made a promise once," she said aloud, "to a boy named Marcus, that if I ever had the chance to fight for a child, I wouldn't let the system win." She pressed the wristband to her heart. "Lucas, you don't know it, but you're the reason that promise is finally getting kept." Somewhere down the hall, a code beeped. Another emergency. Another family waiting. Another parent pacing behind glass. Naomi stood. Still tired, still afraid, but ready. Because this time there was still time. And this time, she wouldn't fail. Some promises are made in silence. Others are carved in scars. But the ones made to a child? They're never forgotten. The system said no, the hospital said no, but her body said yes, and that was enough. Naomi didn't wait for a second message. She had already waited too long. For Lucas, for Marcus, for every child who never got the chance to ask. The decision wasn't made in a moment. It had been growing for weeks, layered in midnight shifts, in whispered bedtime songs, in each time she held Lucas's hand through pain, and never let go. Now it simply had to happen. She opened the notebook she always carried in her bag. The one with Lucas's scribbles on the back page and folded post-its tucked between medication charts. She flipped to a blank page and wrote 3 lines. "This isn't a goodbye. It's the fight the system wouldn't start. And if I lose, at least I lost trying." She tore the page, folded it, and slid it into the top drawer of her nightstand. That night, she made her final preparations. She packed 2 bags, one small, with her ID, documents, insurance card, and the medical clearance she wasn't supposed to have. The other for Lucas. Soft clothes, a stuffed rabbit with a re-sewn eye, and the only blanket he would fall asleep under. Everything was done quietly. No alarms, no announcements. The next morning, Naomi reported for her shift as usual. She smiled at the receptionist, nodded at the pediatrician on rounds, poured coffee for the respiratory therapist who always forgot to eat. At 8:15 a.m., she pushed Lucas's wheelchair toward the private transport bay. He was tired but alert. "Where are we going?" he asked, blinking slowly. "To find someone brave enough to help us," she said, tucking his blanket under his arms. He didn't ask again, because with Naomi, he never had to. The driver was an old friend, a former nurse who owed Naomi more than one favor. He didn't ask questions. He just drove. They crossed the state line by noon. By dusk, they had arrived at the clinic. Small, unlisted, quiet. It wasn't glossy. It wasn't funded by billionaires. But it had one thing the others didn't: willingness. The doctor was younger than Naomi expected. Dr. Yusuf Salem. No white coat, no clipboard, just kind eyes, a slow voice, and a deep scar across one knuckle. "I heard your message," he said. "And I remember what it's like to lose someone because the world made it too complicated to help." He didn't ask for signatures. He didn't review hospital politics. He read Naomi's labs, then looked her in the eye. "Are you ready to do this?" She nodded. "I was ready before anyone knew he was dying." Tests were repeated overnight, just to be sure. Her compatibility hadn't changed. Her blood still matched. Her liver was still strong. There was risk, of course, always risk. She could bleed out. She could lose long-term health. She could not wake up. But the fear didn't matter now. What mattered was that Lucas could. Before dawn, Naomi sat beside Lucas's hospital bed. He was dozing, warm under his blanket, holding his rabbit tight. She kissed his forehead. "You're going to sleep for a while, okay?" His eyes opened slowly. "Are you?" "Yes." "Are we going to be okay?" Naomi held back the tears. "We're going to try." She tucked a letter into the side pocket of his bed. "If I don't wake up, just know. Mommy said yes." Then she turned and walked toward pre-op. The lights in the surgical room were sharp, sterile. Everything smelled like metal and antiseptic. The nurse took her vitals. The anesthesiologist placed the IV. Dr. Salem stood beside her and asked one last time, "Final consent?" Naomi looked at him without hesitation. "He calls me Mommy. That's all the consent I need." The mask came down. The world narrowed, and Naomi finally slept. The surgery was delicate. 2 teams worked simultaneously, one on Naomi, the other on Lucas. Her liver, just a piece, was removed, cleaned, and moved across sterile space. Lucas's body lay open, waiting. Every motion was timed. Every second mattered. No one talked, because some operations are louder than words. Far away, in another city, a phone buzzed on Harlan Whitmore's desk. A message from security. "Naomi Ellis is missing, so is your son." He stared at the screen. Then at a photo still pinned to his office wall. Lucas, smiling in Naomi's arms. No lab coat, no filters, just warmth. He set the phone down, closed his laptop, and stood. He didn't know where they had gone. But for the first time, he understood why. Because when you're the only one left who's willing to try, you don't wait for applause. You carry your scars. You walk into silence. And sometimes, that's how one heartbeat survives. One woman gave part of her body. The boy survived. But now the world had to decide. What would they give back in return? The surgery took 13 hours. 2 hearts didn't stop, but they came close. Naomi lost more blood than expected. The doctors had to call for an extra unit mid-procedure. Lucas's vitals dropped twice. The transplant team moved like ghosts, silent, fast, synchronized. No mistakes allowed, no second tries. The operating room, for all its noise and light, felt like a church. At 3:42 a.m., the final sutures were done. Lucas's new liver, Naomi's liver, was stable. No signs of rejection, no signs of collapse. But they weren't celebrating yet, because Naomi hadn't woken up. She was moved into recovery beside Lucas, both of them in identical hospital beds, machines tracing the beat of what had just been exchanged between them. In one room, a boy who had a future again, and the woman who made it possible, drifting somewhere between silence and survival. By the time Harlan arrived, the sky was bruised with mourning. He didn't bring a security team, didn't wear a suit, just walked into the clinic with a folded photograph in his hand. Lucas at age 4, wrapped in a blanket Naomi had stitched. The receptionist stood. "Sir, where is my son?" Harlan asked. He didn't shout, didn't demand, but something in his voice made people move fast. A nurse led him down the hallway. She didn't explain. She just opened the door. There they were, side by side, hooked to machines, alive. But only one of them was awake. Lucas stirred. His cheeks were flushed with a color Harlan hadn't seen in months. His chest rose evenly. No gasping, no shivering, just breath. The doctor beside the bed looked up. "He's stable. The transplant took..." Harlan blinked. "And Naomi?" The doctor paused. "She's strong, but recovery depends on the next 48 hours. She lost a lot of blood. Her vitals are low." Harlan stepped forward. He looked at Naomi, pale, lips dry, hair matted to her forehead. Then he looked at the scar on Lucas's abdomen, and for the first time, the weight of everything crushed him. He dropped into the chair beside his son and whispered, "She gave you what I couldn't." Lucas turned his head, eyelids fluttering. "Daddy?" "I'm here," Harlan said, brushing his hand across the boy's hair. Lucas blinked again. "Is Mommy okay?" He hesitated. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked at Naomi again, and then back at his son. "She's fighting." Lucas didn't ask what that meant. He didn't cry. He just reached out his hand and rested it on Naomi's arm. Tiny fingers wrapping around her wrist like it was a thread of life. News traveled fast. A nurse mentioned it to a lab tech. A volunteer overheard. By mid-morning, whispers echoed across hospital halls and text chains. The nurse gave her liver. She's not even family. The billionaire's son. She saved him. And just like that, the narrative changed. She was no longer just a nurse. She was something more than legal terms, more than protocol. She was proof that love doesn't need permission to act. By noon, a journalist showed up. By evening, someone from the Department of Health called. Harlan didn't answer any of them. He just sat between the two beds, listening, watching, waiting. He read Naomi's letter, the one they found in Lucas's bag pocket. "If I don't wake up, just know, Mommy said yes." He folded the paper slowly. This wasn't a statement. It was a sacrifice. It was a signature no court could deny. That night, Lucas woke up again. He was stronger now, more alert. He looked around the room, then back at his father. "Will she be my real mom now?" he asked. Not a whisper, not a question laced with fear. It was the voice of a child seeking clarity in a world that refused to define love properly. Harlan stood up, looked down at Naomi again, unmoving, but alive. Then he turned to his son. He didn't answer. He couldn't, because some questions don't need a courtroom. They need time. They need healing. And maybe they need a world brave enough to finally say yes to the people who said yes first. Sometimes a child asks what the world has been too afraid to say, and silence is the loudest answer of all. The 48 hours passed. Slowly. Every hour, Naomi's vitals ticked just slightly higher. Her lungs held steady. Her liver, the part she had left, began to stabilize. The machines beeped in rhythm, but her eyes stayed closed. Lucas visited her twice a day. He sat by her side, read from picture books, and held her hand like it was keeping her anchored. Harlan never left the hospital. He slept in a chair beside both beds. When reporters called, he ignored them. When the board of directors scheduled an emergency meeting, he declined. For the first time in his life, everything could wait. On the third night, it rained. The storm didn't wake Naomi. But Lucas did. At 2:17 a.m., he whispered her name. "Mommy?" Her fingers twitched. He said it again, softer. "Mommy, I'm okay now." Naomi's lips parted. Her breath caught, and her eyes, barely open, glazed, tear-lined, turned to him. He leaned closer, his voice trembling with hope. "You came back." She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her hand closed around his. The nurses found them like that an hour later. Naomi half awake. Lucas fast asleep with his head resting against her side. A pulse monitor blinked slowly between them, steady and strong. Word spread quickly. Doctors, staff, even security guards. People came by the hallway just to glimpse them through the glass. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew. This wasn't just recovery. It was something bigger. It was what happens when love refuses to ask for permission and still chooses to stay. That morning, Harlan stepped outside for the first time in days. He stood in the hospital courtyard under gray skies, holding the same photo, Lucas wrapped in the blanket Naomi had stitched. A journalist approached. "Mr. Whitmore," she said gently. "We know she wasn't officially family, but do you consider Naomi Ellis a part of your household now?" He looked at the photo, then towards the window where Lucas and Naomi rested. "She was always part of it," he said. "The paperwork just didn't catch up." The story made national news, not for scandal, but for humanity. A nurse gave part of her liver to save a child she had no legal tie to. The child lived. She nearly didn't, but she came back, and now the world couldn't look away. A week later, the hospital held a press conference. Harlan didn't speak first. Lucas did. Dressed in soft cotton, bandages still on his side, he stood behind the podium and blinked at the sea of microphones and lights. His voice was small, but his words were not. "Mommy gave me her liver. She didn't have to, but she did, and now I get to live." He paused, looked around. The room went still. "If Mommy gave me her liver, does that make her my real mom now?" Silence fell. Dozens of reporters, lawyers, medical executives. No one moved. No one answered. Because sometimes, a child asks the one question the world hasn't dared to answer out loud. And in that pause, a truth echoed louder than anything spoken. Naomi stood behind him, thinner than before, her hand resting on Lucas's shoulder. She didn't smile. She just looked present, rooted, like someone who had been questioned by the system and still chose to show up. A reporter finally whispered, "So what happens now?" Harlan stepped up to the microphone. He didn't read from paper. He didn't look at notes. He just looked at Lucas, then Naomi, and said, "Now? Now we rewrite the forms, not to define who counts as family, but to recognize who's already been acting like one." The audience didn't clap. Not yet. They just stood, because they had witnessed something quieter than a headline. They had watched the definition of motherhood expand. That night, back in the hospital room, Lucas curled under Naomi's blanket. She was seated beside him, holding a book, her other hand in his. Rain tapped the window again. He looked up at her and whispered, "So, now you're my forever mom?" Naomi didn't answer immediately. She closed the book, brushed his hair back, and said, "Only if you'll be my forever kid." He smiled. "Deal." And outside that room, on screens, in courtrooms, in hospital boards across the country, people were still asking, what makes someone a real mother? And somewhere deep inside that question was a truth waiting for more than applause. A truth waiting for someone brave enough to answer the way Naomi had. Not in words, but with a part of herself she could never get back.